The rain hammered against the windows of the Chen estate like desperate fists seeking entry. Alara Chen pressed her back against the cold wall of her bedroom, her fingers trembling as they traced the familiar texture of the wallpaper. Darkness was her constant companion now, had been for 2 years since the accident that stole her sight. But tonight the darkness felt different. It felt dangerous. "Please," she whispered into her phone, her voice cracking with fear. "Nathan, I need you." The line crackled with silence before a deep, cold voice responded. "I'm not your personal security service, Miss Chen." Alara's breath hitched. Even through the phone, his voice sent shivers down her spine, the same voice that had guided her through smoke and flames exactly 1 year ago. "Someone's in the house," she managed to say, her free hand gripping the edge of her dresser. "I heard glass breaking downstairs. The security system is offline. Nathan, please." "You saved me once before. Call the police." "Alara." His tone remained frustratingly detached, professional, as if they were strangers discussing the weather rather than her life hanging in the balance. "They won't get here in time." Her composure shattered, tears streaming down her face. "Why again? Why do I have to beg you to care? You left without a word after the gala. You disappeared like I meant nothing." The silence stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Then she heard it, a sharp exhale followed by the jingle of car keys. "Lock your bedroom door. Stay away from the windows. I'm 20 minutes out." The line went dead. Alara slid down the wall, clutching her phone to her chest. 20 minutes felt like an eternity when you couldn't see danger coming. She focused on her breathing, on the skills she'd learned since losing her sight. Listen, feel, trust your instincts. Heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway outside her door, not the familiar pattern of her housekeeper or driver. These were deliberate searching. The doorknob rattled. Her scream died in her throat as something heavy slammed against the door. Once. Twice. The wood frame splintered. Then everything happened at once. Glass shattered somewhere downstairs. Shouting erupted. The pounding on her door stopped abruptly, followed by the thunder of footsteps retreating down the stairs. More shouting, a man's grunt of pain, then silence. Alara remained frozen, every muscle locked, waiting for something, anything, to tell her what was happening. Alara. That voice. Cold as winter frost, yet somehow the most comforting sound in the world. "It's Nathan. Open the door." Her hands shook as she felt her way to the lock, turned it, pulled the door open. She didn't need eyes to know he was there. She could feel his presence, smell the rain on his clothes mixed with antiseptic and something uniquely him. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her arms, clinical, checking for injuries with the practiced efficiency of a surgeon. "No. Her words dissolved into sobs as the adrenaline drained away, leaving only fear and relief in its wake. Without thinking, she reached for him, her hands finding the lapels of his jacket, clinging to solid reality in her world of darkness. For a heartbeat, she felt him tense, felt the war within him. Then his arms came around her, stiff and awkward, as if he'd forgotten how to hold another person. "You're safe now," he murmured, and she could hear the strain in his voice, the effort it took him to offer even this small comfort. "Who was it?" she asked against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, controlled, nothing like her own racing pulse. "2 men. Unconscious in your foyer. I've called the police." He stepped back, his hands dropping away from her as if her touch burned him. "We should go downstairs. You'll need to give a statement." "Nathan, wait." She reached out blindly, catching his sleeve. "Don't do this. Don't go cold on me again. I'm your doctor, Alara, nothing more." But his voice wavered, just slightly, betraying him. Liar. She held tight to his sleeve. "A doctor wouldn't have broken every speed limit to get here. A doctor wouldn't have taken down 2 intruders with his bare hands. A doctor wouldn't look at me the way you did at the gala before you vanished. You can't see how I look at you," he said, and she could hear the bitter smile in his voice. "I don't need eyes for that." She stepped closer, feeling the heat radiating from his body, the tension coiling through him like a spring wound too tight. "I felt it then. I feel it now. You care, Nathan Cross. You're just too afraid to admit it. You don't know what you're talking about." He pulled away, and she heard him move toward the door. "Get your coat. It's cold downstairs." As they descended the grand staircase, Alara's hand on his arm, she remembered the first time he'd saved her. The charity gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel had been her first major public appearance after the accident. She'd been determined to prove she could handle her responsibilities despite her blindness. Then the fire alarms had screamed to life. Panic had erupted around her. People pushing, shouting, the acrid smell of smoke filling her lungs. She'd been shoved, had fallen, and in that moment of helplessness, she'd felt certain she would die there. Then his hands had found her. "I've got you," he'd said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute certainty. "Hold on to me. Don't let go." He'd guided her through the smoke and confusion, his movements sure and swift, his body shielding hers from the crush of the crowd. When they'd finally reached the street, when cool air had filled her lungs and emergency sirens wailed around them, she'd turned to thank him. "Nathan Cross," he'd said before she could speak. "Cardiac surgeon. Are you injured?" "Just my pride," she'd managed to joke, still gripping his arm. "I'm Alara Chen, and I owe you my life. Consider us even." Something in his tone had made her wish desperately that she could see his face. "I hope you never need saving again." But then he'd stayed. Stayed while the paramedics checked her over. Stayed while her frantic assistant had arrived with a car. Stayed while police took statements. And when everyone else had finally left them alone, when it was just the two of them sitting on the hotel steps with emergency lights painting the night, he'd done something unexpected. He'd described the scene to her. "The fire trucks are red and white," he'd said softly. "3 of them, lined up like giant toys. The firefighters are packing up their equipment. The hotel windows are dark except for the top 3 floors where the lights are still on. The stars are out tonight. Orion's belt is directly above us." She'd turned her face toward the sky, seeing nothing but eternal darkness, yet somehow feeling closer to those distant stars because he'd shared them with her. "Why?" she'd whispered. "Why take the time to paint pictures for someone who can't see?" His answer had been so quiet she'd almost missed it. "Because everyone deserves to know what beauty looks like, even if they have to experience it differently." In that moment, something had shifted in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire they'd just escaped. They'd talked for hours that night. About medicine and business, about loss and survival, about the weight of expectations and the courage it took to keep going when life demanded too much. She'd learned that his sister had died 5 years ago, that he'd been unable to save her despite all his training and skill. She'd shared her own grief, the accident that had taken both her sight and her parents in one terrible moment. "Do you ever wonder?" she'd asked as dawn began to paint the sky colors she could only remember. "If we're meant to find certain people? If fate puts them in our path at exactly the right moment?" "I don't believe in fate," he'd replied. But his hand had found hers on the step between them, his fingers warm and strong. "I believe in chance, and I believe in making choices with the chances we're given." She'd thought he was choosing her. Thought maybe, in the ruins of their respective tragedies, they'd found something worth building together. But the next morning, he was gone. No number, no message. Just the memory of his voice describing stars she couldn't see, and the ghost of his touch on her hand. She'd tried to find him. Of course she had. But Nathan Cross was apparently very good at disappearing when he wanted to. His hospital claimed doctor-patient confidentiality. Her private investigator had hit dead ends. It was as if that night had been a dream, except she could still hear his voice in her quietest moments. Still feel the safety of his arms around her in the smoke. And now here he was again, his touch clinical and careful as he guided her past the unconscious intruders in her foyer, his voice stripped of all the warmth that had once colored it. The police arrived, asked their questions, took their statements. Through it all, Nathan remained at her side, but somehow completely distant, answering in curt, professional tones that revealed nothing of the man who'd once described stars to a blind woman. When the officers finally left, when her staff had been called and assured of her safety, when the broken window had been temporarily boarded and the security system reset, Alara found herself alone with Nathan in her living room. "Thank you," she said formally, matching his cold tone despite the ache in her chest. "For coming, for staying. You can go now." "Alara," he stopped, and she heard the war in that single word. "No." She held up her hand. "You've made your position clear. You're just my doctor. Nothing more, I understand." She turned toward where she knew the stairs would be, her movements precise despite her blindness. "Good night, Dr. Cross. Send me a bill for your services." She'd made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. raw and broken in a way his carefully controlled demeanor never allowed. "I couldn't lose you." Alara froze, her hand gripping the banister. "My sister died in my arms," he continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had finally broken. "I'd trained for years. I knew everything about the human heart, about how to fix it when it failed, but I couldn't save her. I couldn't save the one person who mattered most." She turned slowly, sensing him moving closer. "Then you." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "At that gala, brilliant, brave, beautiful despite everything you'd lost, and terrified even though you tried to hide it. When I held you, when I kept you safe." He broke off, and she heard him struggling for control. "For the first time since Sarah died, I felt something other than failure. Nathan. But I'm a surgeon, Alara. I know exactly how fragile life is. I know 1,000 ways a person can die, can slip away despite every effort to hold on to them. And the thought of caring about you, of letting you matter, of facing that potential loss again." His voice cracked completely. "I ran! I'm a coward, and I ran!" Tears streamed down Alara's face as she moved toward his voice, her hands outstretched. When she found him, her palms cupped his face, feeling the dampness there, the tremor in his jaw. "I can't promise I won't die," she said softly. "None of us can, but I can promise that every moment we waste running from fear is a moment we could have spent living, loving." Her thumbs traced his cheekbones, memorizing the geography of his face. "You saved my life twice now, Nathan. Maybe it's time to save your own." His hands covered hers, holding them against his face as if she were a lifeline. "I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll learn together." She smiled through her tears. "After all, I've gotten pretty good at navigating darkness. Maybe I can help guide you through yours." When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was desperate, claiming a drowning man finally surfacing for air. And Alara kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring 2 years of loneliness and fear and hope into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan pressed his forehead against hers. "I'll stay," he whispered. "This time I'll stay." And in her world of darkness, Alara finally saw light. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Alara's bedroom, casting warmth she could feel but not see across her skin. She lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sound of breathing beside her, steady, deep, peaceful. Nathan had insisted on staying the night, sleeping in the chair by her bed like a guardian refusing to abandon his post. "You're awake," his voice rumbled softly, and she heard the creak of leather as he shifted in the chair. "How did you know?" Alara turned her head toward him, a slight smile playing on her lips. "Your breathing changed." There was a pause, then quieter. "I've been studying it for hours." Something in those words made her heart flutter. The cold, clinical Dr. Cross was still there. She could hear it in his measured tone. But underneath, something warmer struggled to break through, like spring fighting against winter's last hold. "You should have slept in the guest room," she said, pushing herself up against the headboard. "That chair can't be comfortable." I needed to be close. The admission seemed to cost him something. In case someone came back," she finished gently. "Nathan, the police arrested those men. My security team has tripled. I'm safe now." Safe is relative. She heard him stand, heard his footsteps cross to the window. "Those men were hired by someone, Alara. Someone who knows you're vulnerable. Someone who wants something from you badly enough to break into your home." The word vulnerable stung more than he probably intended. Alara threw back the covers, her feet finding the plush carpet with practiced ease. "I may be blind, Nathan, but I'm not helpless." "I didn't say you were. You didn't have to." She moved toward her closet, counting steps automatically. "It's in every careful word you choose, every protective instinct you display. You see me as something fragile that needs guarding. That's not—" He stopped, frustrated. "Damn it, Alara, you almost died last night." Almost doesn't count. She pulled out clothes by touch, textures and fabrics she'd organized meticulously. "And I've almost died before. The accident that took my sight killed my parents. I survived. I've survived every day since, building a life in darkness that most people can't imagine." She felt him approach, felt the heat of his presence just behind her. "I know you're strong," he said quietly. I've always known that. Your strength terrifies me. Ilara turned, nearly colliding with his chest. His hands steadied her automatically, and she felt the tension radiating through his body. Why would my strength terrify you? Because it makes me want to rely on it. His voice was raw, unguarded in a way she'd never heard before. It makes me want to believe that maybe, just maybe, you're strong enough to survive loving someone like me. Her breath caught. Someone like you? Someone broken, he whispered. Someone who's failed at the most important thing. Someone who doesn't know how to let people in because every person I've ever loved I've lost. Ilara's hands found his chest, felt his heart pounding beneath her palms. Tell me about Sarah. She felt him flinch, felt every muscle in his body go rigid. For a moment, she thought he'd pull away, retreat back behind those ice walls he'd constructed around his heart. But then, slowly, he began to speak. She was 10 years younger than me, bright, funny, full of life. His voice was distant, lost in memory. She wanted to be a dancer, used to practice in our living room, spinning until she got dizzy. Mom would yell at her to stop before she broke something, but He paused, swallowed hard. I thought she was magic. Ilara said nothing, just kept her hands on his chest, grounding him, giving him something solid to hold on to. When she got sick, she was only 16. Congenital heart defect that had gone undiagnosed. By the time we knew, it was too late for a transplant. His hands covered Ilara's, holding them tight. I was in my last year of medical school. I'd learned everything about the heart, about how to repair it, but I couldn't do anything. I had to watch her fade day by day until... His voice broke completely. Ilara pulled him down to her, wrapping her arms around his neck, holding him as his body shook with silent sobs. She felt his tears against her shoulder, felt years of grief and guilt pouring out of him. She made me promise. He finally continued, his voice muffled against her neck, that I'd become the best cardiac surgeon in the country, that I'd save all the Sarahs I could, so I did. I threw myself into my work, into perfecting my skills, into being so good that no one else would have to watch their sister die. But you're still dying inside, Ilara whispered, her fingers threading through his hair. You're still that devastated brother who couldn't save her. Every surgery I perform, I see her face, he admitted. Every patient I save, I wonder why it couldn't have been her. And every time I start to care about someone, every time I feel something real, I remember what it's like to lose them. He pulled back slightly, and she felt his hands frame her face. When I met you at that gala, when I held you in my arms, Ilara, you made me feel alive for the first time in 5 years. And it absolutely terrified me. So you ran, she said softly, no accusation in her tone, just understanding. I ran, he agreed. I told myself it was for the best, that you deserved someone whole, someone who could love you without fear shadowing every moment. But then last night, when you called, when I heard that terror in your voice. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, gentle and reverent. I broke every traffic law getting here. Because the thought of you hurt, of you afraid, of you dying alone, it was worse than any fear I'd been running from. Ilara turned her face, pressing a kiss to his palm. I'm not your sister, Nathan. I'm not going to die just because you love me. You don't know that. His voice was anguished. The world is full of car accidents and diseases and men who break into houses. Every second of every day, 1,000 things could take you from me. And 1,000 things could take you from me. She countered. You could walk out my door right now and never come back. You could operate on the wrong patient and get sued into oblivion. You could simply decide I'm not worth the risk. She caught his wrists, holding his hands against her face. But I'm willing to take those chances, Nathan. Because the alternative, living safe but alone, isn't really living at all. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could practically hear his mind working, his logical surgeon's brain trying to calculate odds and outcomes, trying to find a way to guarantee what couldn't be guaranteed. I don't know how to do this, he finally admitted. How to love someone without being paralyzed by the fear of losing them. Then we'll figure it out together, Ilara said firmly. But you have to stop running. You have to stay even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. What if I fail? The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. What if I'm not good enough at this? Then we'll fail together and try again. She smiled, pulling him closer until their foreheads touched. Nathan, you've spent 5 years trying to be perfect at your job. trying to save everyone as penance for the one person you couldn't save. But you're not God. You're not supposed to be able to save everyone. You're just supposed to be human. Being human hurts, he whispered. Yes, she agreed. But it's also the only way to truly feel joy, to feel love, to feel alive. His lips found hers then, softer than last night's desperate kiss, but no less intense. This kiss was a choice, a commitment, a promise that he was trying, really trying, to let her in. When they broke apart, Alara could hear the change in his breathing, could feel the subtle shift in how he held her. He was still afraid. She knew that fear wouldn't disappear overnight, but he was choosing to stay despite it. I need to examine you properly, he said, his voice sliding back into professional mode, though gentler now. Make sure you're not injured from last night's ordeal. Always the doctor, she teased, but she let him guide her to sit on the edge of the bed. His hands were clinical as they checked her arms, her shoulders, feeling for bruises or strains. But there was a tenderness beneath the professionalism now, a care that went beyond medical necessity. Your heart rate is elevated, he murmured, his fingers on her wrist. That's because you're touching me, she replied honestly. She felt him pause, felt the moment when the doctor became just a man again. Alara, I want to see you, she interrupted suddenly. Can I? You can't. He stopped as her hands rose toward his face. Not with my eyes, she said softly. With my hands, please. After a heartbeat's hesitation, he guided her hands to his face. Slowly, carefully, Alara explored the landscape of Nathan Cross. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at some point and healed slightly crooked, lips that were fuller than she'd imagined, a brow that furrowed even now with worry, hair that fell across his forehead, thick and soft. You're beautiful, she whispered. You can't know that. I can feel it. Your strength, your pain, your kindness, it's all here. Her fingers traced the lines of his face like reading braille. Beauty isn't just what we see, Nathan. It's what we feel, what we know in our hearts to be true. He caught her hands, pressed kisses to her palms, her wrists, the inside of her elbows. How are you so wise? He asked against her skin. How did you learn to see so clearly in the dark? I had to, she said simply. When the darkness took my sight, I had two choices. Let it take everything else, or learn to find light in different ways. I chose light. She cupped his face again. And now I'm choosing you. Even with all your darkness, all your fear, all your broken pieces, I'm choosing you, Nathan Cross. His arms came around her then, pulling her close, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I don't deserve you, he murmured into her hair. Probably not, she agreed with a small laugh. But you're stuck with me anyway. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, two broken souls finding unexpected wholeness in their shared brokenness. Outside, the city woke up, traffic sounds, distant sirens, the rumble of life continuing. But in Alara's bedroom, time seemed to pause, giving them this moment to simply be. Finally, Nathan pulled back slightly. We need to talk about last night, about who sent those men and why. Alara sighed, the real world intruding on their fragile peace. It's probably related to the company. Since my parents died, there have been several attempts to force me out, to prove I'm not capable of running Chen Pharmaceuticals because of my blindness. That's discrimination, Nathan said, anger edging into his voice. That's business, she corrected wearily. My board of directors has been patient, but there are powerful people who think a blind woman has no place in the CEO's chair. The break-in was probably meant to scare me, to make me seem unstable or incapable. Over my dead body, Nathan said fiercely. You're the most capable person I know. The protectiveness in his voice made Alara smile despite the seriousness of the situation. My hero, she teased gently. I'm serious, Alara. If someone is targeting you, then we'll handle it. Together. She squeezed his hand. But not right now. Right now, I just want to be here with you. to pretend, for a few more minutes, that the world outside doesn't exist. Nathan was quiet for a moment, and she could sense his internal struggle, the need to fix things, to protect her, warring with his desire to simply be present in this moment with her. "Okay," he finally said, and she heard the surrender in his voice. "For a few more minutes, the world can wait." He lay down beside her on the bed, pulling her into his arms. Ilara rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart, the heart he'd been so afraid to give anyone. "Nathan," she whispered after a while. "Thank you for staying, for not running this time." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay, for seeing me, really seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself." As the morning light grew stronger, warming the room with golden promise, Ilara felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like hope, like home, like the beginning of a love that was worth every risk. Nathan Cross was still cold in many ways, still broken, still carrying wounds that might never fully heal. But he was here. He was trying. And for a woman who had learned to navigate darkness, who had learned that the most beautiful things often couldn't be seen with eyes alone, that was more than enough. It was everything. Outside her door, life waited with all its complications and dangers. But inside this room, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had every reason to stay closed off to love had found the courage to open up instead. And sometimes that's all love really is. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to stay despite it. To save each other, again and again, in all the ways that matter. "You saved me once. Why again?" Ilara had cried last night in desperation. But as she lay in Nathan's arms, feeling his heartbeat beneath her cheek, feeling his breath stir her hair, she realized the truth. They were saving each other. Every day, in every small choice to stay, to trust, to love despite the pain, and that salvation was the most beautiful thing neither of them could see, but both could finally feel.